Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. I wanted to talk first off about the COVID coup d'etat, or just the COVID coup, as Angelo Codevilla calls it, in an essay which appeared in the American Mind 4 days ago. It's really a withering indictment of what the professional class, the elite class in the United States. He begins, panicked by fears manufactured by the ruling class, the American people assented to being put essentially under house arrest until further notice, effectively suspending the habits, preferences, and liberties that had defined our way of life. Most Americans have suffered economic damage. Many who do not enjoy protected status have had careers ended and been reduced to penury. Social strains and suicides multiplied. Forcibly deferring all manner of medical care is sure to impose needless suffering and death. In sum, the lockdown's medical and economic dysfunctions make for multiples of the deaths and miseries of the COVID-19 virus itself. Bad judgments and usurpations, the scam, not the germs, define this disaster's dimensions. The COVID-19's devastating effect on the U.S. body politic is analogous to what diseases do to people whom age and various debilities and corruptions has already placed on death's slippery slope. Outside of the few who have gained and are still gaining power and wealth from the panic, Americans are asking what it will take to end this outrage, not to modify it with any new normal decided by who knows whom, on who knows what authority. Since no one in authority is leading those who want to end it, Americans also wonder who may lead that cause. What history will record as the great COVID scam of 2020 is based on 1, a set of untruths and baseless assertions, often outright lies, about the novel coronavirus and its effects. 2, the production and maintenance of physical fear through a near monopoly of communications to forestall challenges to the U.S. ruling class led by the Democratic Party. And 3, defaulted opposition on the part of most Republicans, thus confirming their status as the ruling class's junior partner. No default has been greater than that of America's Christian churches, supposedly society's guardians of truth. Since obfuscation, pretense, and lies concerning the COVID-19 are the effective agents of the panic and of the seizure of arbitrary power, truth and clarity about it are the foundational requirements for escaping its effect. Here is a dose. From early March 2020 on, the best-known authorities on epidemics, the World Health Organization and the U.S. Centers for Disease Control, presented the COVID-19 respiratory disease to the Western world as a danger equivalent to the plague. But China's experience, which its government obfuscated, had already shown that the COVID-19 virus is much less like the plague and more like the flu. All that has happened since followed from falsifying this basic truth. Our best and brightest, at first having minimized fears of person-to-person contagion during January and February, during which time the disease spread from China to the West, then declared that the virus is unusually contagious and posited on zero factual basis that would kill up to 1 in 20 persons it infected. That's a 5% infection fatality rate. Based on that imagined fatality rate, they adopted mathematical models from Britain and the University of Washington that predicted that up to 2 million Americans would die of it. The U.S. Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, IHME, modeled the authoritative predictions on which the U.S. lockdowns were based. Its model also predicted COVID deaths for unlocked-down Sweden. On May the 3rd, it wrote that as of May 14th, Sweden would suffer up to 2,800 daily deaths. The actual number was below 40. Whether magnifying this falsehood was reckless or willful, it amounted to shouting fire in a crowded theater. What justifies listening to and paying people who do that kind of science? Establishing any infectious disease's true lethality is characteristically straightforward. Test a large sample of the population proportionally representative of location, age, sex, race, and socioeconomic categories. Follow up with the subjects a month later to add up the rate of infections and learn the results thereof, period. Today, we still lack this definitive, direct knowledge of COVID's true lethality, because bureaucrats have prevented widespread testing for the purpose of firmly establishing the one figure that matters most. That is because that figure's absence allows them to continue fear-mongering. In May, the CDC, by then discredited professionally, though not, alas, in the mass media, was forced to conclude that the lethality rate, far from being circa 5%, was 0.26%, double a typical flu. The CDC was able to keep the estimate that high only by factoring in an unrealistically low figure for asymptomatic infections, never mind inflated figures for deaths. But the US government, instead of amending its recommendations in the face of reality, tried to hide reality by playing a shell game with the definition and number of COVID cases. During March and April, the authorities had defined as cases people sick enough to be hospitalized who also tested positive. Whoever divided the number of reported deaths, a number inflated by a CDC directive to count deaths due to other causes as being due to COVID, by the number of cases thus defined, was predictably scared and willing to heed the best advice, namely societal lockdowns on how to stay safe. That turned out to be ruinous in and of itself. At the time, they defined the number of these cases as the curve, which we were supposed to sacrifice so much to flatten, lest the wave of hospitalizations overwhelm our healthcare system. Because their premises were wrong, that wave never came. Instead, in May, as various non-official surveys were published showing that the majority of those who tested positive for COVID either barely knew that they had been infected or had not known at all, these very authorities doubled down on their dishonesty. They began labeling mere infections as cases. They divorced reporting of those cases from reporting the number of deaths and warned the inattentive public about spiking COVID cases as if infection carried a serious risk. They also promoted widespread testing of wholly asymptomatic persons for current and past infections, the results of which tests were sure to produce a surging number of new cases, thus defined. And they toyed with reporting deaths by attributing to COVID any that involved or looked as if they might have involved it. They then included pneumonia, influenza, and COVID into the category PIC. That is how the death figure came to exceed 100,000. But if the CDC had used the same criterion that it did with the SARS virus, namely severe acute respiratory distress syndrome, the figure by the end of June would have been some 16,000. Such naked ploys could succeed only because the media colluded in them. The New York Times May 27th lead story ominously blared, "California is the fourth state with more than 100,000 known cases." Meanwhile, the number of deaths attributed to COVID continued dropping from ever lower bases. By July the 1st, even using the CDC's inflated figures for COVID-responsible deaths, COVID-19's infection fatality rate for people under 70 was 0.04%. I'll repeat that. By July the 1st, even using the CDC's inflated figures for COVID-responsible deaths, COVID-19's infection fatality rate for people under 70 was 0.04%. But rather than ask how clarion calls of danger comport with decreasing reports of deaths that may somehow be associated with it, the ruling class agitated to reverse returning to normal life. Be afraid, be very afraid. Heads, the house wins. Tails, you lose. Irrefutable, if indirect, indication that COVID is no plague also comes from comparison between the number of deaths attributed to COVID-19 during any given period with the number of deaths due to all causes for the same period, despite official inflation in the number of deaths attributed to the virus. The Imperial College, London's tally for Great Britain, broken down by age of death, shows that the chances of dying from COVID-19 infection roughly track the chances of death from all causes at any given age, except for the very young. For men, the chances of death coincident with the virus don't exceed 1%, or the average death rate, until age 70. For women, they don't exceed the average death rate until close to age 90. In Spain, the death rate for infected persons over 90 years old was 10%. The measure of excess deaths tells a similar story. During the 6-week peak of the COVID event in 2020, Deaths in the US exceeded deaths during the same period in the previous year by 82,000. Considering that concurrently, the 2020 flu season was one of the worst on record. Typically, the flu is responsible for some 50,000 deaths during the season. And given the CDC mandated conflation of COVID numbers with others, the COVID-19 panic in and of itself did not amount to much, except in New York City for reasons only partly known. By the week of June 20th, the CDC was reporting 0 excess deaths, meaning that the figure for weekly deaths was within the long-term normal curve for that time of the year. Not incidentally, in 1957, some 116,000 Americans, out of a population 2/3 of today's size, died of the flu. 10 years later, the toll was 100,000, and in 2019, it was 61,000. By June 2020, the inflated toll from COVID-19 stood at 100,000. In short, COVID-19 is not America's plague. It did not shake America. The ruling class shook it. They have not done it ignorantly or by mistake. They have done it to extort the general public's compliance with their agendas. Their claim to speak on behalf of science is an attempt to avoid being held accountable for the enormous harm they are doing. They continue doing it because they want to hang on to the power the panic has brought them. By the way, whenever you hear someone claiming to speak on science's behalf, referring to authorities rather than to facts and logic, you may be sure that person is a fraud. Falsehood extorted shutdowns, which caused deaths and ruined lives. Lockdowns of the general population had to be based on the premise that everyone is, if not equally vulnerable, then equally responsible, and hence that everyone must stay cooped up to contribute to everyone else's safety. But because every word of that is contrary to reality, false, a lie, applying the lockdown's force to society has caused needless deaths and suffering. Preparatory to considering the lockdown's specific effects, we must be clear about what separation of infected or possibly infected persons from presumably uninfected ones can and cannot do. This has been known to whomever wished to know it since the Middle Ages, and repeated even in the humble 1956 study guide for the Boy Scout Public Health Merit Badge. Quote, protecting the uninfected from infection by limiting their contact with those who may be infected depends on knowing that the people to be protected really are uninfected. Medieval Venetians, to make sure that no one coming from places infected by the plague would bring it into the city, prevented debarking from ships coming from such places for 40 days, quarantine. By the same token, quickly finding the few infected among the many uninfected and removing them even faster, along with those with whom they had been in contact, known these days as contact tracing, is effective only to the extent of the bulk of the population's near virginity. But once an infectious disease is spread within a population, quarantines and associated measures are a waste at best. Personal hygiene and minimizing contact, what we now call social distancing, retain all their natural importance for reducing any given individual's chances of infection to some extent, perhaps even delaying chances of exposure until the disease has run its course. But once a contagion is rooted in a population, these measures make no difference to general public health. The disease running its course means, in part, that enough people have been infected and hence will have developed immunity, that they can no longer transmit it to others, which we call herd immunity. That is how human communities have lived with and through history's countless epidemics. We have seen this once again in how COVID-19 affected Sweden and US states, e.g. South Dakota and Arkansas, that never did shut down. When COVID-19 hit Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel said that regardless of what anyone did, some 70% of Germans would eventually become infected, and that would be that. Isolation makes the biggest of differences, however, to subcategories of the population that may be especially vulnerable to the disease. The bubonic plague was an equal opportunity killer, as was smallpox. COVID-19, however, seems to discriminate a lot. Yes, all diseases are most noxious to those already most debilitated, but this one seems to have done so more than most. In Italy, 99.1% of those who died with or of COVID-19 also suffered from other diseases. But this virus obviously has a special predilection for those with type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, compromised lungs, and most of all, for the very old. To the point that a study by Germany's Ministry of the Interior asked whether it made any sense to ascribe any cause to the deaths of persons whose bodies were in the process of shutting down anyhow. By contrast, COVID-19's effect on ordinary healthy persons is considerably milder than those of ordinary respiratory diseases. What sense, then, could general isolation have ever made in the context of COVID-19? It made some sense in the context of the US ruling class's tragically wrong assumptions, pretensions, or convictions, take your pick, that the COVID-19 is so infectious as well as plague-like in its lethal danger to the general population that a wave of desperately ill and dying patients would submerge American hospitals unless its natural course were slowed. Hence, all medical desks had to be cleared of all other activities, emergency hospitals had to be constructed in the parks, and the Navy's hospital ships had to be brought in. As we have seen, there was never the slightest evidence the COVID-19 virus could produce mass casualties. From the first, all evidence pointed in the opposite direction. Even in New York, where Governor Cuomo hyperventilated panic, the hospitals in the park and the Navy's hospital ship were virtually empty. But the ruling class's attachments to its assumptions, pretensions, convictions overrode the obvious truth that the elderly and infirm should have special isolation from contact with persons possibly infected with the virus, and that the rest of the population should go about its business. The US authorities, the experts, the ruling class, chose to do precisely the opposite. They locked down a general population that is at virtually no risk, thereby delaying the virus's spread to people it could not harm and whose infection would build herd immunity. Keeping millions of people indoors also worsened their health. Keeping people from interacting and working normally wrecked economic and social life. Worst of all, these authorities, these experts, transferred elderly persons known to be infected with the virus into nursing homes. In Michigan, the authorities even assigned to a nursing home an aide known to be infected with the virus. As a result, the as yet fully uncounted deaths in these facilities, which house about 1.3 million people, come to about half of the total US death toll. This is what happened, and it is perverse. It deserves punishment. Doubly so because of the cruelty with which it was done. As known virus carriers and unscreened persons were moved in, as the contagion raged, the debilitated, powerless inmates were prohibited visits from their families. These, being nearly all uninfected, would have posed no danger. Had the families been allowed to visit, they might have become aware of what was happening. As it was, they were powerless to save these innocents who, without advocates, were effectively condemned. One New York nurse was fired for objecting. Triply perverse because some of the officials responsible, for example, Pennsylvania's Secretary of Health, knew what they were doing enough to pull their own relatives out of danger. Others, such as New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who sent 4,500 COVID-infected patients from hospitals to nursing homes and blew off his responsibility for over 5,000 deaths with the words, "people die," later deflected responsibility onto what legitimately may be deemed to be national policy. He cited guidance from the CDC, quote, "nursing homes should admit any individuals from hospitals where COVID is present," unquote. Both the lockdown for ordinary people and the transfer of COVID carriers to nursing homes, said Cuomo, followed CDC recommendations. Cuomo did not resist the recommendation. He was occupied trying to score political points on Donald Trump. In May, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the federal COVID team's most influential MD, explained the counterproductive national lockdown of healthy people on national television. Earlier, he had said lockdowns were needed to preclude the overcrowding of hospitals. That having proved to be his gross professional error as an epidemiologist, he now said that extending the lockdowns was necessary to prevent so many apparently healthy young people from eventually infecting the old and infirm. But there is zero evidence that apparently healthy, i.e. asymptomatic though infected people, infect others with COVID-19. The evidence is that only symptomatic people, ones with coughs and sniffles, do, and that not through casual contact. Moreover, if separating known spreaders had been Fauci's intention all along, why had the CDC ordered COVID carriers to be shifted to nursing homes? At the very least, the man who drove the COVID team did it in a reckless manner that killed people. He too had other things on his mind, political ones. Similarly, governors from New York to Michigan and Illinois to California, Oregon, and Washington have ordered citizens to stay indoors, which always was and once again proved to be the ideal environment for the transmission of respiratory viruses. Illinois' governor criminalized more than 2 people in any boat. Californians have been arrested for walking on the beach, and New York City's mayor threatened to pull swimmers out of the sea, all in the name of science. Online searches find no evidence that shows viruses thriving in fresh air and sunshine, never mind in salt water. The mayor of Los Angeles ordered residents to wear masks at all times outdoors, though there is no evidence that this virus transmits through casual proximity anywhere, but especially outdoors. In July, Dr. Fauci said that masks are necessary, but in March, the same Fauci had said that they did more harm than good, equally without the slightest scientific proof. Surreally, the LA Health Department specified that persons should wash their hands after putting on unwashed face coverings and refrain from touching their faces, except to put on the face coverings that were supposed to make their hands dirty to begin with. Science, anybody? Fauci also guided governors to permit people to congregate by the hundreds at Walmart and Costco, but to forbid them to do so in churches. This font of science also gave his imprimatur to sex among strangers, but advised Christians to refrain from communion, too intimate. What level of partisan credulity does it take to believe any of that? One may also ask what level of partisan credulity it takes to take seriously such personages of the governors of New York, Michigan, and California, and the mayors of Chicago and Los Angeles, who personally flout the regulations they try to impose on others. Restrictions for thee, but not for me. The answer really does lie in the depth of political party class solidarity. The governors and officials who imposed, maintained, and rationalized the lockdowns are all but one, Ohio's Democrats. Their counterfactual assumptions, pretensions, and convictions, their misrepresentations, their falsehoods, and outright lies are all about their social class's effort to secure their privileges against an increasingly recalcitrant general population. We begin by focusing on how seamlessly the Western world's ruling class has translated the COVID-19 event into yet another of its weapons in the fight it has been waging this century against voters' growing disaffection. Support for the lockdowns has become as integral to the American establishment left, i.e. to the Democratic Party, as belief in abortion, global warming, open borders, and censorship of whatever they choose to call hate speech. To understand this, one must realize that the ruling class's campaign regarding public health, global warming, race, the rights of women, homosexuals, microaggressions, the Palestinians, etc., have far less to do with any of these matters than with seizing ever more power for itself. We note that the language, the attitudes by which the ruling class have hyped COVID's health challenge have been integrated into the identities of its constituencies' manifold components, so as to add force to the long-standing demands of each. How readily, how naturally, activists for Black Lives Matter, feminism, global warming, etc., have adopted support of all manner of socioeconomic restrictions on the pretend basis of saving lives from the COVID as if it were their own cause, is yet another practical manifestation of the latter-day left's theory of intersectionality. As the activists of Black Lives Matter burned down buildings, they also wear masks, supposedly to show their commitment to social responsibility for public health. Nor, incidentally, they also tout their commitment to LGBTQ sexuality, for abortion, and against the nuclear family. The same may be noted about every component's support of every other. By the same token, every one of the ruling class's constituencies, the disparity of their foci notwithstanding, has adopted as its own the demand that voting in American elections must henceforth be from home, with ballots collected or harvested by third parties. That would shift electoral power from those who vote to those who process and count the votes, i.e. to themselves. Hence, it would set the entire ruling class free from the voters. Each sub-constituency translates the accusation into its own idiom. In America, accusations of racism are the lowest, alas, the most common form of political pandering and intimidation. Securing over 90% of the black vote being the sine qua non of the Democratic Party's electoral successes, no one was surprised when the New York Times, followed by the rest of the major media, noted that the COVID-19 having struck African Americans proportionally harder than other races proves American society treats them despicably and must submit to reform. Yet at the Times, CNN, etc., they know that this is a lie and that regardless of race, adverse outcomes of COVID-19 infections go along with obesity, type 2 diabetes, etc. And they know as well as anyone precisely to what extent African Americans exhibit these very conditions proportionally more than other races, and that these conditions have more to do with calories today than with slavery 2 centuries ago. The COVID event has also made the face mask into a physical badge of tribal identity common to all the sub-constituencies. Wearing the mask is now about publicly distinguishing the virtuous and deploring the deplorables. North Carolina's Democrat Governor Roy Cooper said that a face covering signifies strength and compassion for others, and wearing one shows that you care about other people's health. On the same day, New York's Andrew Cuomo put it this way: wearing a mask is now cool. I believe it's cool. Wearing a mask is officially cool. Anthony Fauci, who in March had told 60 Minutes there's no reason to be walking around with a mask, in May gave his scientific judgment that masks are a symbol for people to see that that's the kind of thing you should be doing, while admitting that they are not 100% effective. He could have hardly have done otherwise, since the New England Journal of Medicine had said, quote, wearing a mask outside healthcare facilities offers the wearer little, if any, protection from infection, unquote, and is irrelevant to others in casual contact. Such a symbol of intersectional identity has it become that as rioters were burning Minneapolis, its Democrat mayor urged the rioters whom he let burn parts of his city to make sure they wore masks while doing so. In some, the lockdowns have been perpetuated and prolonged by people who care more about your compliance than your health. They are about increasing the Democratic Party's chances in the 2020 election. The 2016 U.S. election confronted the U.S. ruling class with the possibility that the presidency's enormous powers might be used to dismantle its network of prestige and privileges. The public is just beginning to understand the extent to which all manner of bureaucrats and allies used their powers to try defeating the challenge of 2016, and then instituted the socio-political equivalent of basketball's full court press, treating anything and everything about the Trump administration as illegitimate, running official investigations not to gather information, but as pretext for feeding slander to their media associates. They tried to catch Trump in perjury traps. Then they toyed with the idea of leading him into statements that might be construed as bases for removal from office. But the U.S. economy boomed. Trump's ratings rose as 2020 dawned, and Trump seemed a cinch for re-election. The Democratic Party et al. Were grasping at straws for ways of getting at him. In January 2017, Dr. Fauci, speaking at Georgetown University, said he had no doubt that the Trump administration would face a surprise outbreak of infectious diseases. A few days earlier, The Atlantic published an article titled "How a Pandemic Might Play Out Under Trump," which wished out loud that Trump's handling of such an event would undermine his presidency. Yet earlier, NYU professor Arthur Kaplan had published an article along the same lines, "The End of Civilization and the Real Donald Trump." In short, weaponizing a public health event had crossed eager minds. Let's go to the chat. See what's happening there. Okay. There were no shows these last 2 days. Well, it's Tuesday. There was no show on Monday. Yesterday there was a riot in KMG's house. Actually, the riot took place 2 days ago. I think KMG needed a break yesterday, says William Hicks. No, I couldn't actually do the show because my internet was disabled. That is to say, cords were pulled out and the like. YT, I feel like he's been looking like he needs a break. 5 streams a week requires a lot of energy. I don't know. I haven't been sleeping very well for some weeks because of current conditions. There's another stream with 19 waiting. Okay. Every so often, I don't know, but once every 2 weeks, I get the picture, the background picture. It takes it, and then you click next to move to live stream, and then it says it's not working at this time. So I have to go back and start from the beginning. Is Kevin allowed to smoke in his apartment? No, there's no smoking in this building, although there is a balcony in this apartment. Chogokin 666, lady held up the bus today upon entering. She was wearing a mask, goggles, and 2 sets of blue surgical gloves. She then held up the bus, getting off 1 stop later. Chogokin 666 says, and Walmart still doesn't have paper towels, toilet paper, and garbage bags. YT, in Manhattan today, 99% of people on the street wore masks. 2 people had masks and plastic shields. Mind you, it's 100 degrees out. Lemmings. Well, I see that Donald Trump has surrendered, and he is now urging people to wear masks. I recall back in March, when the panic was at its greatest, when in Victoria the buses were free, but you had to enter from the exit. This was at a time when people were walking into the highway to avoid passing close to other people. And since I have gray hair, I noticed an awful lot of people were deliberately stepping out of my way. Well, it's a funny thing that we weren't required to wear masks then. And Dr. Fauci said they weren't any good. And the sainted Dr. Theresa Tam, Canada's chief medical expert, said that they weren't any good. And now we have evidence from a British reporter that the World Health Organization was politically pressured into changing its advice on masks. Let's see. Tweety Bird says, I just finished watching video of a mask refuser being choked, maced, and taken to the floor at Canada's favorite donut shop, Tim Hortons. Yes, I saw that. The justification apparently is that he was asked to leave and he refused. I shouldn't laugh about this, but there were 2 police officers, and one was a man and one was a woman, and they were struggling to drag this man down onto the ground. And let's say that the woman's efforts were completely useless in that regard. YT says, I'm more disappointed in humanity than I've ever been. Well, this has proved one thing, that all this talk about liberty and freedom and how we're liberty-loving, freedom-loving people, no, we're not. And it's also proved, as if it needed to be proved, that the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, is a dead letter. Because all you need to do is to claim a medical emergency, and suddenly civil rights are just abandoned. Deborah says, I saw a dog wearing a mask. Yes, there was some fear last week that dogs were transmitting the virus. They seem to ascribe, human qualities to this virus, as if the virus has some sense of malevolence, and it's always lurking to penetrate our defenses, Metal Mike says, the problem is there are workers who have to enforce mask use, and they are often attacked and assaulted by customers, at least verbally abused. They don't deserve that. Okay. Always sirens. Is Victoria the new Chicago? Well, I live a block away, or half a block, I suppose, from one of Victoria's busiest intersections, and this is the worst part of town. It is, there are, despite the fact that, people have noticed the sirens, always with the sirens, I was looking around the parking lot, which is directly, there's a window here, and there's the parking lot. I counted 4 BMWs, 4 Mercedes, a BMW, a Lexus, and a Bentley. And I was talking to my brother about that, and he said, well, they're obviously drug dealers, aren't they? And I thought, yes, I should have realized that. Okay. Don from Beyond says, I just got my new voter's card. I switched my party from Libertarian to Republican. Philip Daniel says, I'd like to say that living with a physician relative has been a curious experience during this pandemic. It's the only political issue she cares about. She's pro-Biden despite being a Republican. Ultra Testosterone says Biden is a useless, senile old boomer. Well, he really, 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 really wants to be president. And he wants to be president so much that apparently, I don't know, the fix is in, isn't it? That he's not going to be president for very long. I mean, I understand being president, it looks good on the resume. And afterwards, you can cash in the way that Obama and Bill Clinton have. But Joe Biden's already done his cashing in. What, he's going to be 79 years old in January, something like that. I mean, it's too late in the day for him to cash in. I love the pic of Don Jr. with that transsexual really based, says Walrus Libertarian. I haven't seen it. Philip Daniel says of this relative, she hates wokeness just as I do, but thinks it will disappear once Trump is out of office. She views it as a mere temper tantrum by losers. Really? You have essentially what, the mayor of Portland and the governor of Oregon cheering on Antifa rioters who are trying to destroy the federal building. That's, there's no stepping back from that. These people have crossed the Rubicon. Okay, what else do we have here? Little Mike says, Canada's top public health official declared it's okay for thousands to protest. The government has lost all credibility on the COVID file. Well, there's something else going on in my country that public health officials have decided to start throwing their weight around, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. She'll continue watching MSNBC, though, even though she'll admit that all their non-COVID coverage is absolute garbage. I can barely look at Drudge today because we're all going to die. And again, as Codavia pointed out, how come the death rate is flattened? The death rate is flattened. It's gone like that. And apparently that doesn't matter. They throw up this number, 126,000. Well, first off, the numbers are juiced. And second, how many people would have died anyway? How many people over the age of 80 or 90 would have died anyway? Keep in mind that there are 2.8 million people approximately die in the United States every year. Brandon Smith says, must be weird to be Kevin's age and watch every single aspect of society flip upside down over the course of a lifetime. Well, I remember when I was a child during the 1960s, it really did seem to me that society was coming to pieces before my very eyes. There was something of a, reaction in the 1970s against this. That, it looked, serious people thought in the late 60s there was going to be a left-wing revolution in the United States, a violent revolution. There were never all that many people committed to it. The number of people you've got on the streets for these commemorations, these protests, for the looting, for the, Antifa effectively annexing, part of Portland, it's far, far greater commitment than was seen during the 1960s. In the 1960s, it started with, demands for specific types of education, Black studies departments. And then we got, alphabet people studies department and women's study department. And I guess the idea was that, we'll just throw these noisy people some bones. And they didn't stop to think that they would use these as power centers. Oh, we need someone to explain that America is systemically racist and that all white people are racist. Well, let's call on, Professor Shaniqua. And she's an expert. She's got a PhD or an Ed.D., Something about Fauci. Fauci actually endorsed the use of Grinder. During COVID, he actually did that. And okay, wokeness has been the bane of my existence since the 1960s. Well, you know that old expression, the personal is the political. The left has been very fond of this. But of course, now the personal is not only the political, it's the sociological as well. And I just can't. So much of intersectionality is just based on boasting about how miserable your life is. And this seems to be particularly virulent among younger people, millennials, I suppose, and those younger than them. That, the Irish call this poor mouthing. That, oh, my life has been miserable. Oh, your life has been miserable. Let me tell you about my life, etc. And it's depressing. It is depressing. Rumor is Drudge sold the site and signed an NDA. Yes, I have seen this. I have seen this. I mean, he's definitely turned on Trump. The Drudge site always had a fascination with various kinds of disaster. But you look at it now, and people are, as the kids say, they are standing this disease. It's shocking. Go second wave. Come on, second wave. You can do it. Come on, second wave. You got to go strong till November. You can keep this going until the election. Kent State. Jim Smith mentions Kent State. Well, 4 people died in Ohio, as the song goes. And then 2 people were killed at Jackson State. And Tom Wolfe reported that a lot of people thought that things were going to be lit in September 1970 when the university students returned, and instead it was quiet, because apparently the lesson had been learned that playing at revolution can get you killed. But now, of course, I know a lot of people actually believe this, and I tend to believe it myself, that Trump has not acted. Well, you've got, Barr's federal police, but Trump has not, brought the National Guard in to secure order, because there would be a military coup against him. That, I think that if, say, 50 people, as little as 50 people, destroying buildings, burning buildings, looting or whatever, were shot to death, that would be it. It would be over. But apparently that's too much to risk. I also commend to you a piece by Codavia, who is really perhaps he's certainly one of America's most powerful and original thinkers. A piece from July the 9th called Scamocracy in America. I'll just read a brief extract. Over the past 50 years, the rules of public and even of private life in America have well nigh reversed, along with the meaning of common words, e.g. marriage, merit, and equality. Social inequality, even more than economic, has increased as personal safety and freedom have plummeted. People are subject to arbitrary power as never before. No one voted for these changes. Often, as with the negation of the Defense of Marriage Act and of the referendum-approved California constitutional provision to the same effect, these reversals expressly negated law. Just as often as in the case of our mounting restrictions on freedom of speech, they have happened quite outside any law. Altogether, they have transformed a constitutional republic into an oligarchy at war with itself as well as with the rest of society. The U.S. Constitution and the way of life lived under it are historical relics. Peter Hitchens was writing about masks in his Mail on Sunday column. In the name of COVID, the state has already thrust itself into every corner of our existence. It has come between husbands and wives at the ends of their lives. It has forbidden the old to embrace their grandchildren. It has denied us funerals and weddings, locked the churches, silenced the ancient monastic music of cathedral choirs, and prevented the free worship of God for the first time in 800 years, and banned us, unless we are left-wing, from holding or attending public meetings. It has ordered us to stay at home, scolded or fined us for sunbathing, going on country rambles, or even entering our own front gardens. It has forced millions of us to stop working, sabotage the educations at school and university of untold numbers of young people, and has become our boss and paymaster in the biggest state takeover of life and work ever attempted by non-communists. Soon we will discover that it has also wrecked an already wobbly economy and separated untold numbers of us from jobs and businesses we thought were safe. Soon, too, it will also separate us from our savings through punishing tax and savage inflation to pay for the disaster it has caused. Now it presumes to tell us what to wear. And what it wants us to wear is a soggy cloth muzzle, a face nappy that turns its wearer from a normal human into a mumbling, mouthless submissive. And this, it seems, is popular. Is there nothing the modern British people will not put up with? Britain's muzzle consumption is now so high that 6 months from now, there will be reports of dolphins and whales floundering about in an ocean made sticky by millions of gallons of hand sanitizer as they choke on concealed clumps of used muzzles. These items are set to become the new plastic bags. Why is this frenzy taking place? Here's a clue. On July the 12th, Deborah Cohen, the medical correspondent of BBC Two's Newsnight, revealed an astonishing thing. The World Health Organization had reversed its advice on face masks from don't wear them to do wear them. But the key fact was that it was not done so because of scientific information. The evidence had not backed the wearing of face coverings, but because of political lobbying. She revealed on Twitter that, quote, "We had been told by various sources that the WHO committee reviewing the evidence had not backed the masks, but they recommended them due to political lobbying," unquote. She said the BBC had then put this to the WHO, which did not deny it. In March, the WHO had said, quote, "There is currently no evidence that wearing a mask, whether medical or other types, by healthy persons in the wider community setting, including universal community masking, can protect them from infection with respiratory viruses, including COVID-19, unquote. The American TV news channel CNN reported on March 31st that Mike Ryan, executive director of the WHO Health Emergencies Program, had said at a briefing in Geneva, quote, "There is no specific evidence to suggest that the wearing of masks by the mass population has any potential benefit. In fact, there's some evidence to suggest the opposite in the misuse of wearing a mask properly or fitting it properly," unquote. A few months ago, the WHO changed its advice to say it advises that government should encourage the general public to wear masks where there is widespread transmission and physical distancing is difficult, such as on public transport, in shops, or in other confined or crowded environments. Earlier that same month, England's chief medical officer, Chris Whitty, had said that wearing face masks would do little to combat the outbreak, while noting that if someone was infected, they might reduce the danger of spreading the disease by covering their faces. Professor Whitty said wearing a face mask had almost no effect on reducing the risk of contracting the illness. He stated, "In terms of wearing a mask, our advice is clear, that wearing a mask if you don't have an infection reduces the risk almost not at all. So we do not advise that." Also in March, the Advertising Standards Authority banned 2 firms' advertisements for masks, saying that the adverts were misleading, irresponsible, and likely to cause fear without justifiable reason. At about the same time, Dr. Jenny Harries, a deputy chief medical officer, warned that people could be putting themselves more at risk from contracting COVID by wearing muzzles. She said masks could actually trap the virus and cause the person wearing it to breathe it in. She explained for an average member of the public walking down the street, it is not a good idea. On April 3rd, the other deputy chief medical officer, Professor Jonathan Van Tam, said he did not believe healthy people wearing them would reduce the spread of the disease in the UK. The British government has also zigzagged. As recently as June 24th, in a series of official pamphlets for reopening shops and services, the Department for Business and Enterprise said repeatedly, the evidence of the benefit of using a face covering to protect others is weak, and the effect is likely to be small. So, masks have not been made mandatory where I live, although they are mandatory in many parts of North America. I would say between probably 5 to 10% of the population wearing masks here in Victoria, but these people are overwhelmingly old or Oriental or both. Although I went for a long walk on Sunday, several miles, And I passed this young man on the street. He was in his 20s. He looked quite fit, and he's wearing a face mask. And I had to prevent myself from speaking to him and saying, what on earth do you think wearing a mask outside is protecting you from? But there is it makes people feel more virtuous. That is true. But the governments have decided that they intend to reduce us to the level of Chinese coolies. That much is clear. Jim Kunstler wrote yesterday, everything's in play now. Consensual reality is on the run. The old certainties of U.S. history and the receding promises of the future sink into a fiery sludge of the coronavirus present. Things happen without apparent consequence. Authority is on the lam. Coercion stalks the land, rooting out thought crime. Fantasies and delusions rush into the space that reason has vacated in fear of its life. Maybe better not think at all, but you can't help it, can you? To be human is to be dogged by your own thoughts. One thought I can't help thinking is that the failure to resolve the dishonest operations of Russiagate is a big part of what drove authority and responsibility, those two sentinels of sanity, AWOL. The crimes of officers in the FBI, DOJ, CIA, and other agencies go unadjudicated, while clear evidence of their seditious misdeeds has been publicly documented and widely published. It seems as if this great matter of attempting to overthrow the president has come down to the sheer will of William Barr and John Durham, daring to ignite the engines of consequence, and you wonder if they have any idea how their stalling damages the national psyche. General Flynn, the American Dreyfus, remains twisting slowly in the wind despite the DOJ dropping charges against him. Judge Emmett Smith is busy destroying the credibility and authority of the federal bench with bad faith procedural shenanigans underwritten by Ben Witt's lawfare claque of beltway shysters maneuvering in the background to protect Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Is it not past time for the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals to force Judge Sullivan to end the case or admonish and remove him? In a better society, the newspapers would have rushed to General Flynn's defense, except our leading newspapers are so vested in years of their own untruth that they don't dare to cover the story. Where's the consequence for Dean Baquet, editor of the New York Times, since Times staffer Barry Weiss disclosed his failure to control the ideological bullying, coercion, and hostility to fair play in his newsroom? Baquet has not just wrecked an institution, he's made the whole business of covering reality look like a hustle. Does the New York Times board of directors not care about its reputation? Maybe the message is, why should anyone care about his or her reputation? And what kind of culture grows out of that code? The mayors of New York, Chicago, Seattle, Los Angeles, New York, Minneapolis, Portland, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. have all allowed rioting, looting, property destruction, and arson to reign in their streets, and entertained measures to defund and hogtie the police or abolish them altogether. These are all Democratic Party-controlled cities with Democratic mayors. Do you suppose that voters have had a good look at these scenes and concluded that the Democratic Party is perhaps uninterested in civil order? And for what purpose exactly? Does it reflect badly on President Trump that the murder rate under Bill de Blasio and Lori Lightfoot is suddenly off the charts while they are busy undermining police authority and its ability to protect the public? What do you make of St. Louis Chief Prosecutor Kim Gardner moving to prosecute Mark and Patricia McCloskey for defending their house against a mob that threatened to burn it down? Missouri Governor Mike Parson declared over the weekend that he'll pardon the couple in short order if they are charged, at last, on unequivocal and decisive action on behalf of sanity. There will be a whole lot more in the way of real-life problems to make the American people crazy in the months ahead. We have not even cleared up the affronts to decency and reason that happened before the coronavirus landed and began destroying millions of lives and livelihoods. The siren call from anarchy is already blaring. Is there anything about this republic that you think is worth defending? Is thinking canceled? So very strange story about Tucker Carlson. And this is from the Washington Post. You know, democracy dies in darkness, never forget. On Monday night, Fox News host Tucker Carlson made a surprising accusation. The New York Times, he said, was trying to endanger him and his family by revealing where they live in an upcoming story. As he lambasted the newspaper on air, Carlson suggested that his primetime show could expose the home addresses of the reporter and Times editor. Well, the reporter has been thoroughly doxxed on Twitter. Within hours, an army of conservative Twitter accounts started publicly posting the address and personal information of the reporter Carlson identified as the story's writer. Many encouraged people to harass the reporter. In a statement to the Washington Post, a spokesperson for the Times denied Carlson's claims. Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Instead of addressing the lawsuit or the recent resignation of his chief writer, who was linked to anonymous blog posts containing racist, homophobic, and misogynistic language, Carlson used the final minutes of his first broadcast back from a long-planned vacation to take aim at the Times. The newspaper, Carlson alleged, has been working on a story about where my family and I live in an effort to intimidate him. They hate my politics. They want this show off the air. If one of my children gets hurt because of a story they wrote, they won't consider it collateral damage. They know it's the whole point of the exercise, to inflict pain on our family, to terrorize us, to control what we say. That's the kind of people they are. The host noted that his home address in Washington was made public in 2018, prompting a group of activists to show up outside one night to protest. Referring to the group as screaming Antifa lunatics, Carlson, a father of four, said the protesters vandalized his residence and threatened his wife, who had been home alone that night. Police who responded to the scene after Carlson's wife called 911 said about 20 demonstrators participated and that an anarchy symbol had been spray painted in his driveway. He said Monday that he and his family continued to be targeted after his address was released, receiving threatening letters that ultimately led to them selling their home and moving. But the New York Times followed us, he said. Their story about where we live is slated to run in the paper this week. Editors there know exactly what will happen to my family. He identified the reporter behind the story as Murray Carpenter, airing his photo and calling the freelance writer a political activist. Okay. So, Steve Saylor reports today, Google has memory hold my blog as well. Try Googling Steve Saylor. In contrast, Bing still recognizes the existence of my blog. Suddenly, Google has disappeared. TuckerCarlson.com, FoxNews.com/shows/Tucker Carlson tonight. It's almost as if there's an election coming up and Google is going for maximum election interference. Well, I said this before, but, every 4 years, political commentators who they like to stress, the importance of what they have to say, will say that this is the most meaningful election, since whenever, right? Well, 2020 is a very meaningful election indeed, because the left doesn't have the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is split pretty much down the middle. The left doesn't have the Senate, and they don't have the presidency, and things are already this bad in the United States. If Joe Biden becomes president, then America will be transformed out of all recognition. I see that according to the Wall Street Journal, Walt Disney Company fired senior ABC News executive Barbara Fedida after an investigation confirmed allegations that she made insensitive and racist remarks about colleagues at the network. Apparently, she was insufficiently kowtowing to Robin Roberts. And again, it strikes me as odd that so many of the black people on television are homosexual. I wonder why that is. New York Andrew Cuomo, I suspect, I haven't looked this up, is one of those people mocking Donald Trump for his big, beautiful wall. Well, it seems like Andrew Cuomo is the love gov dishing it 24/7. He's building a virtual wall. Let's see. Governor Cuomo says a second wave in New York is inevitable. Come on, second wave. You can do it. It's just a matter of how hard it hits. Meanwhile, just 2 new fatalities were reported overnight across the state, with no new ones in the city. It's right there in the subhead. It's right there that this panic is totally made up. So more than one half of America is now on New York quarantine list. 10 more states added Tuesday. Well, I guess I'll have to put off any plans I had of visiting New York. I have been to New York. I spent a month there some years ago. And I couldn't get over just how nasty the people are in New York City. They seem to delight in being nasty. My Canadian friend who was showing me around, he said, "Oh, we should go into this delicatessen." And I said, "Why?" And he said, well, it's famous. Famous for what? He said, "Well, the owner is so rude." And I said to him, "So how would he differ then from every other shopkeeper that I have met in this city?" William Briggs writes, "Yes, more testing leads to more new cases." And again, oh, yeah, cases. These people aren't being treated, but we're going to call them cases because, yeah, we make the truth. Briggs writes, "The beginning of the panic in the U.S. saw politicians elbowing each other out of the way to be first to the microphone to condemn citizens for racism for refusing to order General Tso's takeout. Get to Chinatown," they declared, "where the fortune cookies are always good news." The next phase and each subsequent phase thereafter began with the stark denial that there was any previous phase and that the current prescriptions were always the same. "We were always at war with East Asia. Of course you shouldn't go to Chinatown and have a meal. In fact, you should not have meals out anywhere. Don't bother with masks, though. They do nothing," Frau Ducci told us. Then the run on toilet paper and bottled water happened. I understand the toilet paper, I understand that part. But bottled water, was there there was a fear that the water systems were going to stop working? Because, yeah, you lift this up and water pours out. In fact, there's typically at least three different places in the lowliest apartment where you lift a lever and water comes pouring out. You can choose between cold water or hot water. And I don't know why people needed bottled water. Let's see. Panicked populace, loyal news watchers all got into fistfights at Costco over the last 1,000 count roll of single ply. Shelves were stripped bare of canned goods as if the zombie apocalypse had already happened and the survivors were starving. General Motors was ordered to cease making cars and begin producing ventilators. There weren't enough. More would never be enough. Then people started being detained in various locales, arrested for walking outside a second time in one day. Neighbors ratted out neighbors. Many never went outside, for the air could kill you faster than CNN could deny Joe Biden said what he just said. Hardened criminals dared stroll alone on beaches, or they sat in parks on the grass in the sun. Some, emulating the worst excesses of Hitler, reopened their businesses and gave haircuts. Then the panic began to ebb a bit. Nothing dramatic. Reported deaths, the metric of choice by leaders and propagandists everywhere, were down. Leaders who insisted the only solution to this unique, never-before-seen, unheard of, utterly brand new, there were no such things as viruses before 2020, and if there were, nobody ever died from them crisis, was to lock down non-essential workers, decided to ease off a bit. And all was well. For a week. Then somebody, perhaps a woke intern at the New York Times, had the brilliant idea of calling infections, past or present, of this or any other coronavirus new cases. Since the previous metric was death, and only those that were cases died, this switch in definition ratcheted up fear to acceptable levels again. Flattening the curve was forgotten, illnesses were forgotten, deaths were forgotten, new cases became all. Grateful leaders reinstituted controls. That's when the mask mandates began. One leader began them, then the other leaders, fearing that they could blame for increases in new cases if they didn't do something, required them to. First, people only had to wear masks inside businesses and buildings. Then they had to wear them in their own homes. Then they had to wear them everywhere, in and out. Masks quickly became political and a sublime excuse to vice signal. The goofier the protection, the purer the soul. Then those who did not wear a mask were called criminals. It became a crime, a real, genuine official crime, a mark on your permanent record to not wear a mask. How easy it was for government to create a new crime. This new crime, punishing the new criminals rather, would save lives. What a wonderful newfound power. Why there are many ways to save lives. Each could require its own new crime. What a glorious future we are entering. Anyway, that's where we are now. The question before us is, one, when, if ever, will the panic ever end? And two, given the panic extends at least into the new future, what new forms will it take? Well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Oh, Lockdown Skeptics, Toby Young's a roundup. A reader has pointed out that the new government guidance, face coverings, when to wear one, and how to make your own, includes a section entitled Exemptions to Wearing a Face Covering, where they are mandated. That means lockdown skeptics don't have to wear one. Among the legitimate reasons not to wear a mask is putting on, wearing, or removing a face covering will cause you severe distress. I don't know about you, but having to wear a nappy on my face when I go shopping will cause me severe distress. Heather McDonald has written about the COVID panic, or she gave a lecture at Hillsdale College. She writes, the politicians' ignorance about the complexity of economic life was stunning, as was their hypocrisy. To a person, every elected official, every public health expert, and every media pundit who lectured Americans about the need to stay in indefinite lockdown had a secure or essential job. Not one of them feared his employer would go bankrupt. Anyone who warned that the effects of the lockdowns would be more devastating than anything the coronavirus could inflict was accused of being a heartless capitalist who cared only about profits. But to care about the economy is to care about human life, since the economy is how life is sustained. It is a source of meaning as well as sustenance, binding humans to each other in a web of voluntary exchange. It is a source of meaning as well as sustenance. To its workers, every business is essential, and to many of its customers as well, even judged by the narrowest possible definition of public health, lives lost. The toll from the lockdowns will exceed that of the virus due to the cancellation of elective medical procedures, patients' unnecessary fear of seeking medical treatment, and the psychological effects of unemployment. Being fantastically risk-averse is now a badge of honor, at least among the professional elites. A young tech columnist for the New York Times wrote an op-ed in May about canceling a restaurant reservation in Missoula, Montana. Missoula County had been virus-free for weeks, and Montana's caseload had been negligible. Nevertheless, the columnist experienced a panic attack after booking a table, contemplating the allegedly lethal risk that awaited him in the reopened restaurant. Rather than being ashamed of his cowardice, the columnist was proud, he wrote, to have bailed out of his reservation in order to continue sheltering in place. I wonder what would happen if these people, like this New York Times writer, if they were shown, microscopic pictures of, human hands and faces, you could see all the bacteria crawling around. What do you think they would do? Do you think they would wet their pants? Do you think that they would perhaps vomit in fear and disgust? Perhaps faint? Because we're surrounded by disease. In fact, there's all sorts of stuff inside us. Viruses, various viruses, bacteria, whatever. Some of it is useful to us. But apparently, total safety can be guaranteed, or something close to it. How long before we all have to wear bike helmets everywhere? When we're outdoors? People trip. People trip and smack their heads on the sidewalk. People trip. They get run over by cars. Maybe we should make bicycle helmets mandatory and indoors as well. I mean, people slip in the shower, smack their heads. People die that way. People, they leave something on the floor, trip over it, smack their head on a coffee table. People die that way. We can't be too safe. I say this as a joke, of course, but, there's a possibility that, well, let's put it this way. For what? For 100 years or so, children rode bicycles with bare heads, and then it was decreed that all children must wear bicycle helmets. I was really unaware of any kind of, significant numbers What, a whole generation of children being wiped out by fatal bicycle accidents? I've been in a bicycle accident myself when I was a child. I suffered a great deal of pain and lost the skin off my knees and my elbows and one of my eyebrows and got a black eye. Very painful indeed, but no long-term consequences. And it gives you a story. To tell. Alex Berenson writes, nice that the CDC is making it official, but nothing new here. The serology tests have all said the same thing since April. IFR is far lower than case fatality ratio indicates. Just wait until they hear about T cells and herd immunity in Atlanta. It'll blow their minds. And I should have said this when I was reviewing Berenson's book, Tell Your Children, book on marijuana last Friday. But Berenson is a very brave man. And I mean, he doesn't have to be. And he should definitely be saluted for this. Fox 35 investigates questions raised after fatal motorcycle crash listed as COVID-19 death. On Saturday, Kent Donahue from Dr. Pino's office said that the motorcyclist's death was reviewed and he was taken off the list for COVID fatalities. Oh, because somebody made a fuss. Yeah, well, how many of these obviously fake cases are going to remain on the books because no one is making a fuss? This is a story from the U.S. Sun. Coronavirus infected couple put under house arrest and forced to wear ankle monitors after refusing to stay home. So there's a young man with a beard and an extraordinarily attractive young woman. Elizabeth and Isaiah Linscott said personnel from the health department and sheriff's office showed up at their Kentucky home after she declined to sign a self-quarantine order, according to reports. The woman underwent a voluntary test for COVID-19 before going to her parents in Michigan and found out she was positive but did not have any symptoms. The health department then contacted Elizabeth and requested that she sign documents that would restrict her travel unless she called the department first. She said she chose not to sign the documents because of one sentence. It is reported, I will not travel by any public, commercial, or healthcare conveyance such as ambulance, bus, taxi, airplane, train, or boat without the prior approval of the Department of Health. My part was, if I have to go to the ER, if I have to go to the hospital, I'm not going to wait for the approval to go, Elizabeth said. She said that she would let workers know she had tested positive in the event she needed to go to the hospital. Officials from the Handon County Sheriff's Department arrived at the couple's house days later without warning, to the surprise of husband Isaiah. I opened up the door and there's like 8 different people, 5 different cars, and I'm like, what the heck's going on? This guy's in a suit with a mask. It's the health department guy, and 3 different papers for us, for her and my daughter. The couple must now wear ankle monitors, and cops will be notified if they travel more than 200 feet. Yeah, the land of the free and the home of the brave. Although I see that my old friend Jason Kenney, I'll just read this briefly, okay, because it's very funny to me that the Canadian province with the strictest lockdown is Ontario, which supposedly has a far-right premier, Doug Ford, and Jason Kenney, another supposedly far-right premier. With case numbers on the rise over the past few days, yeah, case numbers. Premier Jason Kenney had a blunt message for Albertans who have stopped following public health guidelines intended to slow the spread of coronavirus. Knock it off, Kenney said, at a new conference where the province reported 2 more COVID-19 deaths and 141 new cases of the illness. Well, there's 4.4, I believe, million people in Alberta. And let's get an update on the numbers there. They're not very high. They're not really all that high anywhere in Canada. In Alberta, there have been 9,587 total cases and 170 deaths. Again, we're talking about a province with a population of more than 4 million people. How is this even considered a crisis, let alone a catastrophe? it was obvious all along that since the lockdown was not going to prevent the spread of the virus, that when they began testing more people, then you were going to get so-called more new cases. The fact that almost all of these people are asymptomatic apparently is irrelevant for some reason. Completely irrelevant. Oh, you want some humor? Iowa teachers sending their own obituaries to Governor Reynolds in protest of school reopening proclamation. This is from Fox News. Teachers in Iowa are penning their own obituaries and sending them to Governor Reynolds after she announced last week that schools must hold at least 50% of classes in person amid the coronavirus epidemic. Reynolds' Return to Learn proclamation allows school districts to hold primarily online classes, but only in certain situations, such as parental request or public health conditions. The move has concerned teachers and parents who say safety precautions are insufficient and a return to classrooms will endanger children, educators, and families. Some teachers are now writing their own obits. I have prepared my obituary and sending it to Governor Kim Reynolds to express my concern regarding the absence of a statewide mask mandate for our schools. Jeremy Dumkrieger, a Sioux City educator, wrote in an op-ed published in the Iowa Starting Line. His obit reads in part, and try not to laugh, okay? Jeremy Dumkrieger, 43, passed away on insert date here due to complications arising from COVID-19. He died alone, isolated from the family who meant the world to him. So teachers are trying to get away with being paid. They already get 4 months off every year. Now they want 12 months off, and they want to continue to be paid. Notwithstanding the fact that there's no evidence that children have the capacity to pass on COVID-19 to adults. And so there may be federal action on this. According to Reuters, the federal government could allow families to use education funding elsewhere if local public schools do not open during the coronavirus pandemic, the U.S. Education Secretary said on Thursday, as the Trump administration sought to pressure states and cities to fully resume in-person classes. If schools aren't going to reopen, we're not suggesting pulling funding from education, but instead allowing families to take that money and figure out where their kids can get educated if their schools are going to refuse to open, DeVos said. DeVos, a proponent of private and religious education, who has long pushed school choice, gave no details on the plan. Can you imagine that? Private schools, what's all that about? And the Canadian government has decided to ban the Toronto Blue Jays from playing the Rogers Centre, as this would involve crossing of a border. The leading Blue Jays fan site is called Bluebeard Banter, and it's run by a fellow called Tom Dakers. And he reacted to a comment by Mark Shapiro, leading executive at the Jays. We respect the decision. The virus has been well managed by public health and political leaders in Canada. We understand and appreciate the decision. Dakers comments, well, I'm guessing community health wasn't the top concern for all. If it was, the province and city wouldn't have approved. No matter what, the approval wasn't based on community health. You could possibly think that there is a slim chance of someone getting sick from the teams coming to town, but you can't think there is no chance. You can decide that the chance is so slim, it is worth it. I sometimes get the impression that the fans of the Toronto Blue Jays are the most paused in Major League Baseball. Is this guy afraid of his own shadow? Baseball is a dangerous game. You know, people run into each other on a regular basis and people get hit, with fastballs thrown 95 miles an hour. But this Dakers fellow is afraid of the air itself. Rosie DiManno, who is a Toronto Star columnist with whom I not often agree, she writes there, feel better now, all nicely Corona's snug and smug in Toronto with the Blue Jays booted out of town. Maybe go out and celebrate, why don't you, at a patio bar on the weekend? Or better yet, if you live outside the big smoke, hit a restaurant for indoor dining and drinks where few are apparently paying any heed to continuing physical distancing provisos. But no Major League Baseball players around over the summer to potentially befoul your COVID-shielded bubble. Close one, huh? High and inside. You can largely thank the chattering commentariat for that, suddenly transformed into a platoon of brown shirts, decrying the health risk that would have descended on this burg had the team received federal government approval to play their regular season home games at the Rogers Center, where they've been cocooned for the past couple of weeks for inter-squad games, having fled Dunedin and the COVID maelstrom in Florida. Yeah, okay, well, see, this is a crisis, and how do we know that it's a crisis? Well, the Blue Jays can't play in Rogers Center. You see how this works? Players plead with NFL to address health safety concerns. Let's see, Drew Brees tweeted, "We need football, we need sports, we need hope." Saints quarterback Drew Brees wrote on Twitter, "The NFL's unwillingness to follow the recommendations of their own medical experts will prevent that. If the NFL doesn't do their part to keep players healthy, there is no football in 2020. It's that simple. Get it done, NFL." This is a guy who was regularly hit at high speed by big, powerful men and has his body and his head smacked down on sometimes grass, but mostly concrete, covered with a rug. But he's worried, Drew Brees is worried about the air. Apparently there was some sort of general strike yesterday. This is from the Associated Press. Organizers said at least 20,000 workers in 160 cities walked off the job, inspired by the racial reckoning, again with the reckoning, that followed the deaths of several black men and women at the hands of police. Visible support came largely in protests that drew people whose jobs in healthcare, transportation, and construction do not allow them to work from home during the coronavirus pandemic. One of the organizations that partnered the strike was led by the co-chairman, the Reverend William Barber II, co-chairman of the Poor People's Campaign. The Strike for Black Lives was organized or supported by more than 60 labor unions and social and racial justice organizations. Let's go back to the chat. Oh, I see. We're getting that again, are we? Okay. I put up a shield, but it may have shifted. Alex DeLarge, Trump shouldn't waffle between masks, no masks, masks. Yeah, I don't know. Just wearing this mask, it looks weak. It radiates weakness. That's, Biden's thing. If you take a knee, you'll be immune to COVID. Well, that's supposedly how it works, because COVID is a very righteous virus. Manfred von Sisselbaum says they will limit the homeschooling curriculum to the 1619 project. I'm sure they already have. Alex Delar says, I view homeschooling as a very important thing. Well, it is, and it's going to take off this year. But this is going to be one of the, the left wants to ban homeschooling for obvious reasons. They want to ban private schools, too. Well, I'm sure they'd make a exception when in Washington, D.C. for Sidwell Friends, the Quaker school, where the tots of the elite go. I wonder how diverse Sidwell Friends is. Buddy asks, is Q fully 100% discredited or just like 97% discredited at this point? I don't know. Ghislaine Maxwell got arrested. That's a pretty big deal. And William Barr made a point of saying that she is not going to be killed in prison, which suggests that William Barr doubts the official verdict on Jeffrey Epstein's death. Deboris, if Obama was still in office, COVID would have stayed in China. No, I suspect it would have just have been, I don't know, maybe it would have been ignored, as flu seasons typically are. But again, it turned out, I'm sure that the climate change people are just kicking themselves in frustration. It was really that simple all along. All we have to do is to declare this a public health emergency, get the public health officers to do that, and then we can ruin the economy, which means a lot less carbon emission. But, they want to ruin the economy even more than that. But, I mean, it's still early days yet. Canada is continuing to pay people not to work, including people who weren't working at the time that COVID got started. Okay. Okay, people are asking what if questions. Eternal Fisherman says, Alex DeLarge, why do the French have these satanic accents? Oh, what, diacritical marks? I don't know, they aid in pronunciation, I suppose. Okay, so moving on. This is a good article in Unheard by Angela Nagel, who is the author of the book Kill All Normies, which I reviewed on the Old Book Club with Luke Ford. I found it a very informative, thought-provoking book. She is Irish, and she's writing about the future of Ireland. Talk to an educated Irish person in a global city today, and you will quickly discover that they hold the twin ideologies of post-Celtic Tiger Ireland, a vague, sentimental remnant of the Irish ethno-nationalism of the revolutionary period and the internationalist and multicultural open society values of Google. Point out that these are contradictory in any way, like mentioning Ireland's role as an international tax haven, or asking why there are so many Irish nationalists living in London, Berlin, and San Francisco, and so few living in Dublin, and you will be met with defensive anger. As a former colony, historically unsullied by the sins of slavery and imperialism, Ireland's national identity has been largely free of the culture of pathological self-hatred found across most of the liberal West today. An uncomplicated sense of national pride has remained the default, even and sometimes especially on the political left. But all that is about to change. Toppling statues is just the beginning, ran a recent Irish Times headline, if the goal is how to make Irish culture less racist. They could have dealt with this problem by not importing large numbers of people from Nigeria and other places in Africa. Ireland didn't have a racism problem when there was only white people living there, and the same thing could be said of Canada, but I guess my country and Ireland, they were both jealous of the United States, because you could say the same thing about England, because look at all this excitement in the United States, heads being bashed and sit-ins at lunch counters, and why can't we have that here? Yeah. As self-flagellating stories about the Irish public's racism are set to now become a daily part of life, Ireland's elites can breathe a sigh of relief. Any populist pressure they sensed brewing while overseeing a deeply economically unequal society with skyrocketing homelessness, rents, and outward youth migration can now be replaced with an imported moral narrative that turns the spotlight around on the reactionary masses who must, in the name of equality, learn to think of themselves as privileged. I saw someone on Twitter had a list of apartments for rent in Dublin, and these apartments were dumps, and they cost a fortune. Who has the money for this, I wonder? Nagel continues, well, educated Irish young people in Dublin copied the Black Lives Matter protests from America. Our culturally progressive and economically Thatcherite TSAC, Leo Varadkar, recently singled out the statue of Irish Republican Sean Russell as a problematic target. Russell fought in the War of Independence and died trying to secure arms from Germany in 1940. Wrongly thinking that historical facts could ever stand a chance against the wrecking ball of the current international woke cultural revolution, some Republicans correctly pointed out that he was not doing so out of any allegiance to Nazism, having tried to secure arms from any nations that might give them. Protesters still vandalized the statue anyway, painting it with the gay pride rainbow flag with added black and brown to mark their support for Black Lives Matter. Having uncritically adopted the fashions of American academia, Ireland's new young educated elite have started parroting the imported language of white privilege versus people of color, and the dangers of nationalism versus the superior multinational capitalism-friendly values of openness. Yeah, it's worth asking why the woke cultural revolution sweeping Irish society would spare a single one of our national statues, monuments, or heroes. One could go through the entire list of signatories on the proclamation of the Irish Republic and find cancelable and problematic thoughts uttered by each of them in different contexts. The deeply Catholic Constance Markievicz cited the anti-Irish ideals of immorality and divorce against the Anglo-Irish Treaty. Porrick Pearse explicitly wrote of blood sacrifice and the Irish race, saying that there could be no peace between the body politic and a foreign substance that has intruded itself into its system, which must be expelled or assimilated through war. And she gives examples of problematic statements made by George Bernard Shaw, William Butler Yeats. And what about the special place given to the Irish language in state institutions, which could easily be argued excludes and discriminates against foreigners? And where is this all going to end up? Well, as a result of the low tax policies introduced in the late 90s, Ireland today is effectively a tax haven, hosting the European headquarters of Google, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Some of these companies have been found to be paying as little as 0.005% tax. While this project gave Ireland the Celtic Tiger economy, it also produced a deeply unequal society, totally subservient to the sovereignty and ultimately the values and culture of the corporations who today are its guiding force. For our obedience, we received surely the lowest of honors just last year when anti-yellow vests French intellectual Bernard-Henri Lévy congratulated us for being, quote, a people who resist the winds of populism, unquote. It is a tragic irony of Irish history that having fought a globe-spanning empire to build an independent Irish nation and having fought the imperial landlords through agrarian peasant movements before that, giving the world the very word boycott, it stands today as a tax colony of American tech, in which the native young leave because of its unchecked speculative landlordism. The revolutionary generation that gave us the Irish nation understood that you cannot be culturally, intellectually, or economically self-directed if you're ruled from a foreign power. Recent events have started to reveal the irreconcilable and contradictory nature of the official ideology of post-Celtic Tiger Ireland, which tried to dress up our colonial relationship to international capitalism as a national triumph. The Irish will soon learn that if your economy is ruled from California, your society will start to look like California, a nowhere of the very rich and very poor, but without the sunshine. Bloomberg reports that the first votes in the 2020 election will be cast in 6 weeks. So let's see, September 4th, ballots will be sent out in North Carolina. Pennsylvania, September 14th, Michigan, September 19th. That's 2 months before the election. So apparently it's not necessary to actually have an election campaign. I guess you don't need debates because people have made their mind up. Trump was intimating that he's going to have to wait and see about the fairness of the election. But there's no question in my mind that the Democrats intend to steal it through mail-in voting and subsequent harvesting of these votes. But I'm thinking that, it may not be as bad as some think, because what this will simply do in many cases is just allow the Democrats to run up supermajorities in states that they would have won even without cheating. Now, I suppose if Biden gets more votes than Trump, then, he's the real victor. But, it didn't work in the past, and it's not going to work again. How a great power falls apart. A decline is invisible from the inside, writes Charles King in Foreign Affairs. And he mentions one of my very favorite writers, a brave and amusing man who's called Andrei Amalrik. He was a Soviet dissident who was finally allowed to leave. And he died at the age of 42 in a car accident, which some people find suspicious. I remember I was in Paris when he was released, and there was a picture on the front page of Le Figaro of Almeric, his wife, and their cat, which he had made famous in his writing. But Almeric had written a book called Will the Soviet Union Survive Until 1984, which was seen as a joke or a jest, because obviously the Soviet Union is going to survive well into the 21st century. The Soviet Union gets stronger with each year, etc., etc., and the Soviet Union collapsed rather quickly. And the author of this piece suggests a comparison with the Soviet Union of the late 1960s and America today. And I don't know. I mean, this, how would you put it, declinism has been rather popular for some decades, and it's been mostly laughed off. But after the, continuing events of 2020, it's difficult not to conclude that there is something rotten in Western countries. I mean, America's in bad shape, but Canada is in even worse shape. And I'll give you an example. I was talking about the health authorities throwing the weight around. Well, let's see. CBC reported that June was the worst month for overdose deaths in BC history. There were 175 deaths due to illicit drugs in the province last month, up from the previous high of 171 in May. Yeah, how about that? And so, drug overdose deaths, Radio Canada International reports, far exceed COVID-19 in British Columbia. 170 in May, June 175. The total number of COVID deaths this year in the province is 189, with no new deaths reported compared to the total of 728 overdose deaths this year. Officials say fentanyl and carfentanil is mixed in with the drug supplied by local dealers who may be inexperienced with mixing drugs, as border closings and travel restrictions reduce typical supply routes. Okay. So what do you think that the Association of Chiefs of Police of Canada want to do about this? What do you think that Dr. Bonnie Henry, the sainted Dr. Bonnie Henry, the Chief Medical Officer of the province of BC, wants to do about this? Indeed, what do you think that John Horgan, the Premier of British Columbia, wants to do about this? Well, according to Global News, BC Premier John Horgan is formally asking the federal government to decriminalize possession of illegal drugs for personal use. In a letter sent to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Monday, Horgan says decriminalization would, quote, reduce the systemic stigma associated with illicit drug use and support people to access the services that they need, unquote. Criminal prohibitions are ineffective in deterring drug use, and criminalization of drug possession directly leads to both individuals and systemic stigma and discrimination that prevent people from seeking services. No, apparently there's not enough people dying of fentanyl overdoses in British Columbia. Let's more fentanyl for all. This is absolutely astonishing. That obviously criminalizing something, it results in a stigma. But maybe we could just, legalize everything, all forms of behavior, assault, theft, robbery, rape, murder. You can't, you don't want to stigmatize people for committing crimes. I could look this up, but it would be a waste of my time, because I suspect that the number of Canadians, say last year, who were actually imprisoned for simple possession of controlled substances was close to zero. The cops don't care about it. I wonder what the cops in Canada actually do with their time. I've noticed here in Victoria that people drink openly on the streets, on the sidewalks, in front of liquor stores, and smash windows, that sort of thing. And I suppose the cops would be called, but I'm sure the cops would say they had better things to do. Like what? I wonder. There's a white pill story from Revolver. Red Bull just purged high-level execs who pushed for diversity and inclusion. Red Bull just reminded their wokest employees who calls the shots in a total massacre of social justice warrior employees. Not only were the top 2 North American executives fired, but so were entire marketing teams and culture teams that were dedicated to pushing the lie of systemic racism. Red Bull has shown the way forward for all who want to prevent a total Marxist-style takeover of business and government in America. There is no appeasing these people. The only way forward is to fire them as quickly as possible and with no mercy. Err on the side of firing everyone if need be. Yeah, the Wall Street Journal reported that Red Bull GmbH, the Austrian company that makes the drink, said Stefan Kozak, its North American chief executive, and Amy Taylor, its North America president and chief marketing officer, have left the company. Taylor had been working on diversity and inclusion efforts within the company with Kozak's support for several years, but was met with opposition when she began advocating for Red Bull to be more overt in its support of racial justice in the last month, according to people familiar with the matter. Some U.S. employees had recently raised concerns about what they considered the company's inaction on the Black Lives Matter movement. Oh, yeah. What are we just selling an energy drink? Yeah, that's what we do here. We sell an energy drink here. We're not trying to change society. Along with firing the executives, Red Bull cut or dissolved entertainment and culture teams in Canada, the UK, and Austria, and canceled most of its major cultural events, including its annual Red Bull Music Festival and Red Bull Presents. 2 employees said global CEO Dietrich Mateschitz told staff earlier this year that there wouldn't be any layoffs in 2020. 2 others who work in marketing, however, said management told them that between 20 and 50 people were laid off or told that they would have to choose between new jobs and exit packaging. In a 2017 interview, according to the Daily Mail, Mateschitz expressed sympathy with Donald Trump and said the new president simply needs time. Well, it's good to know that there's still one CEO in the world who has courage. Here's a black pill story. Cisco fires workers for racial comments during diversity forum. During a series of Cisco Systems Inc. online all-hands meetings on race in early June, some workers posted comments in message channels that staff and company management said were demeaning to Black people, exposing racial divisions at the Silicon Valley tech giant and leading to the dismissal of a number of people. During the first video conference on June the 1st, following the killing of George Floyd by Minneapolis police. Now, what? Okay, so a career criminal gets killed at the hands of police in Minneapolis, and this affects Cisco Systems how? Exactly. In any event, CEO Chuck Robbins spoke with Ford Foundation President Darren Walker, who is Black, and Brian Stevenson, a Black lawyer and author who founded the Equal Justice Initiative, in front of 30,000 employees. The conversations about race continued in subsequent online global staff meetings. No, they're not conversations, they're lectures. Black lives don't matter, all lives matter, one worker wrote in the comments during one of the virtual all-hands meetings, according to screenshots obtained by Bloomberg. Another said the phrase Black Lives Matter reinforces racism because it singles out one ethnic group. Quote, people who complain about racism probably have been a racist somewhere else to people from another race and part of systematic oppression in their own community, unquote. A third worker wrote in the chat section visible for all those online. Cisco, the world's largest networking company, said it fired a handful of workers for inappropriate conduct because it will not tolerate racism. Bloomberg News wasn't able to confirm the identities of all the fired workers, so chose not to name any of them. Oh, one has to feel deeply for Bloomberg here. They missed the opportunity to further wreck the lives of these employees who have already lost their jobs. Executives have publicly positioned themselves against racism, but some workers inside these companies are chafing at the new focus on race. The incident at Cisco is just one example of a company facing an internal backlash to its support for racial justice. The conflict has intensified questions about how these largely forward-thinking companies would manage employees with differing views on race. While Costco fired some workers, other tech companies facing dissent, such as Microsoft Corporations, LinkedIn, and HashiCorp Inc., have taken different approaches, such as increased employee training. Automaker Toyota Motors dismissed U.S. workers involved in a video that mocked Floyd's death. Cisco said that 237 of 10,400 comments made during the June 1st video conference objected to what was being presented or disagreed that the meeting should even be taking place. Can you imagine? Most of the messages expressed praise for management, making the minority of reactionary posts stand out and sparking responses from other staffers. The post, written while Robbins was announcing a $5 million donation to groups combating racism, shocked some executives. At the first meeting, who is this person? Francine Katsoudas and her team discussed the comments so they could address what went wrong. People with differing opinions, yes, definitely. What went wrong? The following week, during a worldwide video conference with staff, doesn't this sound like the most boring thing possible? It's bad enough sitting in meetings that last for hours, but no, you have to stare at a computer screen and remain alert for hours. It sounds like torture. You have a framework where red absolutely is crossing the line, Katsuda said. But if someone has a question or they don't understand something, there's a way for them to ask that question. We went through and just placed things on that spectrum. In 2019, 3.8% of Cisco's U.S. workforce and 2.2% of leaders and people managers were Black, according to the company's diversity report. Well, this is what I say to Cisco. Your leadership should be at least 13.5% Black. You need to fire a bunch of, vice presidents and the like and replace them with Black people. Otherwise, shut the hell up, hypocrites. Ali Wentworth, I know who this woman is. She is best known as playing the bitchy, unfaithful girlfriend in the hilarious film Office Space. But now she is best known for being the wife of George Stephanopoulos, who, of course, infamously attended Jeffrey Epstein's "I'm Getting Back into Society" dinner party. Yeah, after his imprisonment. Ali Wentworth would watch porn with her teenage daughters, Elliot, 17, and Harper, 15. These people really think that they're sophisticated because they would give their daughters names like Elliot with 2 T's and Harper, because I guess Ali decided that these names were auspicious in some way. They're certainly unique or close to being unique. You wouldn't, want to have a name that other people have. The nightcap actress shares her 2 children with her husband, ABC News' Good Morning America co-host George Stephanopoulos. In porn, women have been conditioned to look and act in a certain way, Wentworth, 55, told Deborah Messing and Mandana Dayani on the latest The Dissenters podcast episode. So in porn, women have been conditioned to look and act a certain way. You don't say. I had no idea that was true. She added, they are performing, and it's dangerous to have boys see this as something women want. No, I think it's something that men want, actually. It's a performance. She really needs to watch pornography with her daughters to know this. You can't stop them, so I would watch it with them, the Go Ask Ali author explained. I would look at the porn with them that one time like they're performing. Wentworth also said she tries to sneak in lessons with her daughters when they're scrolling through social media. I say, do you see this girl? There is a hole she is trying to fill, the actress recalled. Unfortunate choice of words there. The comedian, oh, is that what she is, has been known to embarrass her daughters when it comes to the topic of sex. In her 2018 memoir, Go Ask Ali, she boasted about how much she and Stephanopoulos 59 had sex, much to the envy of her friends, Us Weekly reported. She later appeared on Good Morning America alongside the political commentator and declared, I'm not ashamed of it. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Whenever famous people boast about how much sex they're having with their lives, I simply do not believe them. What did Tony Blair once claim, or his wife claimed, that they had sex 6 times in a night, which at their age would be physically impossible. 6 times, I don't know, even for 20-year-olds, pretty much impossible. But no, let's boast about our sex lives to the whole world. There is a up-and-coming rapper I first heard about, about a year ago? Megan Thee Stallion. She has an enormous ass. Tory Lanez allegedly opened fire on Megan Thee Stallion early Sunday morning after arguing with her and her friend, according to sources directly connected to the investigation. We're told that the argument started after the group left a Hollywood Hills party together in the chauffeur-driven SUV, and at some point, Megan and her friend Kelsey Nicole wanted out of the vehicle. Our sources say Tory opened fire from inside the vehicle and allegedly hit Meg in the feet twice. TMZ broke the story. LAPD pulled over Tory's ride. A short while later, Megan's feet were clearly bleeding on the sidewalk as she followed police instructions to exit the vehicle. Tory was arrested for possession of a concealed weapon. Why hasn't he been booked for the alleged shooting? Well, sources connected to Tory say there are mitigating circumstances. Based on what we know, we believe he's going to say it was an accidental shooting. Apparently, Megan Thee Stallion is quite upset that some people have found this incident amusing. Tory Lanez. I believe I've mentioned to him on this show. Needless to say, that is not his real name. His real name is Daystar Peterson. I am not making this up. Better known by the stage name Tory Lanez, this is from Wikipedia, is a Canadian rapper, singer, composer, and record producer. And he's an idiot. Okay. He is an idiot. Let's see. Daystar also goes by the name Argentina Fargo. In an interview, he said, when I put foreign and banking together, it's like foreign money. I'm a Canadian dude walking around America. When you look at me, it's like looking at foreign money. So I call myself Argentina Fargo, like foreign money. I believe that the unit of money in Argentina is called the peso. But, my God, these people are stupid. Yeah, okay. Yeah, all right. I'm not going to talk anymore about Megan Thee Stallion. Fans expressed concern for Nick Cannon after his latest social media posts. I see all the recent pictures of Nick Cannon. He's wearing glasses. And I remember Sylvester Stallone started doing this, in the 1980s? You see, I have weak eyes, and that proves that I'm smart because I'm wearing glasses. And now Nick Cannon is wearing these very nerdy glasses. Over the past days, this is from Urban Hollywood 411, Nick Cannon has faced backlash for anti-Semitic comments he made on his podcast, Cannon's Glass. Now fans are expressing concern after the actor and TV host sent out a series of social media posts that referenced leaving the planets. Here's a tweet from 5 days ago. I hurt an entire community and it pained me to my core. I thought it couldn't get any worse. Then I watched my own community turn on me and call me a sellout for apologizing. A good night. Enjoy Earth. 30 minutes later, he posted another tweet that read, "Y'all can have this planet. I'm out." And I went to his Twitter feed, and the posted tweet, the one at the top, when evil men plot, good men plan, which is a quotation of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I see that Nick is talking to a rabbi. I wonder if they get into it. Is Nick going to keep up this his belief that that black people are the real Hebrews, the real Israelites? And there has been not very much Twitter activity from Nick Cannon. He got off pretty easily, I have to say. He still seems to have about half of his jobs. In other black celebrity crack-up news, Kanye West says he'd be at peace if Kim Kardashian divorced him after he claimed they almost aborted daughter North 7. Again, this is the sort of thing one talks about in public. The mogul revealed the duo discussed not going through with the birth of North 7 years ago while giving a shocking secret on Sunday during his first presidential rally in South Carolina. And there's a picture of him wearing a security vest, and he is weeping. Yeah, okay. It all kicked off when Kanye, 43, began telling the crowd at the Exquise, I don't know if that's proper pronunciation, event center in Charleston about how his father had wanted to abort him. The rapper claimed Kim had the pill in her hand. Oh dear, oh dear. And there's a picture of the couple with Kanye wearing one of the ridiculous shoes that he designed. He's an architecturizer. Yes, he actually uses that word to describe himself. And Kim Kardashian is wearing what appears to be some sort of variation on combat pants, and she looks as wide as a house. Kardashian's friends seriously concerned, upset over wild campaign appearance of Kanye West. Our sources say, this is TMZ, say those around him believe Kanye is in desperate need of professional help and is in the middle of a serious bipolar episode, but he won't listen to them. As I mentioned, I believe I mentioned on Friday that Kanye West calls his bipolar disorder his superpower. Yes, that's right. We're told that they also believe Kanye is tanking some of his businesses, if not all of them, with rants like when he went on about Harriet Tubman, claiming she did not free slaves. His family and friends know comments like these are the things that trigger boycotts. Well, as it turns out, we don't really know very much for certain about Harriet Tubman. That the stories about her tremendous heroism seem to come, well, from herself. She was a woman who also had serious mental problems. I wonder how much of the vote, how much of the black vote Kanye West is going to get, assuming that he stays in the race and doesn't pull a Ross Perot would be to drop out of the race and then to get back into the race. And I mentioned Dr. Bonnie Henry. There's been a whole bunch of stories on this theme. Fake list of COVID-19 wisdom attributed to Dr. Bonnie Henry making rounds online. A warning to those quick to hit the share button on social media. And the list of 16 items runs the gamut of sound bite-style takeaways from Dr. Henry's many press conferences and interviews. However, while the ideas may ring somewhat familiar in step with things she has said, none of the items on the list are direct quotes from Dr. Henry, nor did she assemble the list. Here's number 1. We may have to live with C-19 for months or years. Let's not deny it or panic. Let's not make our lives useless. Let's learn to live with that fact. That definitely sounds like something she would say. Some of them just seem like outright trolls. You can't destroy C19 viruses that have penetrated cell walls by drinking gallons of hot water. You'll just go to the bathroom more often. Yeah, that definitely sounds like something a medical health officer would say. So a final look at the chat. What if Dimebag Darrell was still alive? There's a real cult around that guy, isn't there? I'm not all that familiar with his music, I must say. Alex Large says Q is an elaborate conspiracy maintained by GOP operatives. I don't know, is Justin Bieber a GOP operative? He seems to believe in it 100%. I don't think the GOP has much interest in this at all, actually. Tweety Bird says, like a little boy threatened you to run away from home. Stassi Kanye has lost it. I thought it, well, what, when he interrupted a Grammy? Who was it, Taylor Swift? You know, he starts off saying, I'm a whatever. He goes on this rant, and then he did the same thing to Beck at the Grammys. Kanye has something like 25 or 30 Grammys, but as Steve Saylor argued, apparently he should win every Grammy every year, and if he doesn't, it's it's racism, isn't it? I don't like him. I don't like him at all. I think he's crummy at everything that he does. But I'm vastly amused, by what's happening, because for the last 15, close to 20 years, music journalists have said that he is the greatest thing in music. He's perhaps the greatest musician that music has ever produced. And of course, he's compared himself to Shakespeare and various other worthies. De Boraya says Argentina Fargo sounds porn star. I suppose so. It just is. There is a rapper called French Montana. I think he was trying to go for that effect. But Argentina Fargo, it just sounds stupid. Stassi says, I wish I could block Megan Thee Stallion from appearing in my life. Well, I don't know that she's likely to be mentioned more often on this show. Seems unlikely. But why was this fellow Tory Lanez, Argentina Fargo? Okay, so he was brandishing a gun, at the window of his car, and it just happened to go off. Why was he brandishing the gun in the first place? And I can understand, under certain circumstances, one, bad discharge, but two? Yeah, it seems to be stretching credulity. That is the show for tonight. I will be back on the air, God willing, tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you enjoyed the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. On Theater Thursday this week, I'm going to be discussing a movie which is set in a castle, and it's about lunatics, but it's actually all about the existence of God, actually. It's William Peter Blatty's Demented, the Ninth Configuration from 1980. And on the book club, a fantastical novel about patriotism, about the small is beautiful. It's called The Napoleon of Notting Hill by G.K. Chesterton. If you would like to support this program, and I'd very much appreciate it, because of certain circumstances, which I'm not going to go into today, suffice to say that this is killing me here. And I can't, it's a risky situation. Let's put it that way. But my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And I will leave you with this, that in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope that all my dear listeners and viewers manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Thank you and good night.